Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're getting into a topic that's, well, it's a bit of a medical mystery. We're exploring conditions where psychological stress doesn't just feel like a mood, it feels like actual chronic physical pain. We're talking about somatic symptom disorders, and this is so much more common than you might think.
Oh, absolutely. The numbers are pretty staggering.
Our sources say that over 80% of us report some kind of somatic symptom in any given 7-day period.
hmm And get this, for more than half the people walking into an outpatient clinic with a physical complaint, doctors can't find any corresponding medical condition,
Wow.
which really frames the central challenge, doesn't it? It forces us to ask a really difficult question. If your body is screaming with pain, what deep emotion are you refusing to let your mouth speak?
That's a powerful way to put it because many people just assume this is, purely in their head.
Right.
But your sources point to a strong biological factor. How do we square that?
Well, it's definitely not that simple. It's absolutely multifactorial. Biologically, there's a clear genetic component.
So it runs in families.
It does, yeah. SSDs are seen in about 10 to 20% of first-degree relatives.
Okay.
And then psychologically, the cognitive model is really key. It all stems from these catastrophic sort of distorted thoughts. Patients will fixate on a totally harmless body sensation.
Like a muscle twitch or a small ache.
Exactly. And they misinterpret it with just excessive alarm.
The sources also point to a critical link with low self-compassion. Is that like a vulnerability?
It is a huge one. It's strongly associated with both a higher number of symptoms and, well, a reduced quality of life. But we also have to talk about the massive influence of trauma.
Right.
Adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs. They contribute profoundly to negative health outcomes in adulthood. And that includes somatic symptoms.
So because of that link, that neurobiological link between past trauma and current physical distress, it becomes essential for caregivers to assess for that history.
It is absolutely essential, especially when you consider the elevated risk of suicidality in this population. You just have to ask.
Okay, let's unpack the specific disorders a bit. What are the key clinical differences? Because they can look like completely different diseases.
They can. So first, there's somatic symptom disorder itself, SSD. That's where you have significant chronic physical symptoms causing real distress over a long period.
Like the case of June you mentioned, the one with the severe lower back pain.
Exactly. Her pain was completely real to her, but all the diagnostic tests showed nothing that could possibly account for that level of suffering.
And then you have the really dramatic presentation of functional neurological disorder.
Right, which used to be known as conversion disorder.
Yeah.
This is where you see altered motor or sensory function.
Like sudden blindness or paralysis.
Yes, like the case of Frederick, who experienced stress-induced temporary blindness right before a major presentation. The critical distinction there is that the physical symptoms are incongruent with known anatomy or physiology.
Meaning they just don't line up with how the body's actually wired.
Precisely.
Okay, finally, we need to separate the intentional deceptions. Factitious disorder versus malingering.
A vital distinction. And it all comes down to one thing: motivation.
Okay.
With factitious disorder, a person is fabricating symptoms purely to assume the role of a sick person.
So the motivation is internal. They want the care, the validation.
Exactly. There's no obvious external benefit. Malingering, on the other hand, is faking symptoms for a very clear transactional benefit.
Like avoiding work or for financial gain.
Right. Avoiding deployment, getting money. The motivation is entirely external. That's the whole difference.
So what does this all mean for you if you're seeking help or maybe providing it?
Well, the challenge is that actual diagnosed medical disorders can exist at the same time as SSDs.
Which has to make diagnosis incredibly difficult.
It does, because the presentation is purely physical. It's so hard to tease apart. So when you look at the bigger picture, the goal of therapy has to shift.
Away from just treating the physical symptom?
Exactly. It's about helping the patient learn to, well, to stop using their body as a message board. They need to learn how to identify and articulate those complex, avoided feelings: anger, shame, guilt.
So they no longer have to rely on a medical symptom to show their distress.
Yes, that's the goal.
That leaves us with a final kind of provocative thought for you.
Yeah.
Considering how pervasive these somatic symptoms really are, what emotions might you be physically suppressing in your own life? And what new strategies could you maybe use to express those feelings verbally instead? Okay, so let's dive in. We're looking at a topic today that I think affects millions, but is still so deeply underestimated.
Right.
We're talking about feeding and eating disorders, specifically anorexia, bulimia, and binge eating disorder.
And our source material is very clinical, very foundational. It's really focused on the core facts, the prevalence, and the critical safety points.
Exactly. So our mission here is to sort of cut through that dense language and just pull out the insights that, really matter.
And what jumps out immediately, for me at least, is the sheer scale of this, especially when it comes to young people.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, this isn't some niche issue. The sources are calling eating disorders the third most common chronic illness for adolescents. We're talking ages 13 to 18.
The third. That statistic alone, it completely reframes the whole conversation, doesn't it?
It really does.
And then you look at the adult numbers. For anorexia nervosa, AN, the lifetime prevalence is around, 0.60%? And much higher in females.
Right, about 3 times higher.
But then bulimia nervosa, BN, is almost double that. It's at 1.0% prevalence. It's so interesting that the sources point out that BN is actually more common.
It is, and culturally, that's not what you'd think. AN gets so much of the media focus, but the data shows BN is, a much more widespread problem.
With a slightly better prognosis, too, which is noted.
Yeah, slightly better prognosis. And we have to remember the context. These are more common in industrialized places where, thinness is seen as attractive.
And in certain groups, right, like female runners or gymnasts or male wrestlers.
Exactly. Male bodybuilders, wrestlers, for sure.
And before we get into the mechanics of AN and BN, we have to touch on binge eating disorder, BED.
We do.
Because its prevalence is the highest of all. It's a huge 2.8%. So can you just quickly define how the sources separate BED from bulimia?
The absolute essential difference is the compensatory behavior.
Okay.
BED has those recurring binge episodes, that feeling of being completely out of control.
But without the purging.
Exactly. No purging, no excessive exercise, no misuse of laxatives. It's just the binge itself.
Okay, let's pivot then to the danger. Because the sources draw this really, this terrifying link to comorbidity.
Yeah, that's a huge piece of this. These disorders, they rarely, if ever, exist in a vacuum.
They're almost always co-occurring with something else.
Almost universally, yes.
Yeah.
The biggest overlap is with an anxiety disorder, which, if you think about it, makes a lot of sense.
Of course. And then major depressive disorder is also incredibly high, like 50 to 75% of patients.
And trauma. A history of sexual abuse is reported in, I think, 20 to 50% of cases, which is just a staggering number.
And that leads straight to the deadliest metric in all of this.
Suicide.
The risk for self-harm and suicide. Up to a third of all deaths related to eating disorders are from suicide. That's central.
It is. And to understand that risk, you have to get at the psychology behind it. With anorexia, it all comes down to control.
A terror of gaining weight is the phrase they use.
A complete terror. Self-worth is judged almost entirely by body shape and weight. So controlling food becomes this desperate way to feel powerful.
To fight off that feeling of being helpless.
Exactly. And you see it in the behaviors. Cutting food into tiny bits, pushing it around the plate.
So if AN is about maintaining control, bulimia is more about that cycle of losing it.
Yes. Losing control and then trying to reclaim it. It's defined by that binge plus compensatory cycle.
The patient feels totally out of control during the binge.
Which is where you see those cognitive distortions really kick in.
Yeah.
That faulty logic.
Like that all or nothing thinking.
Precisely. The classic example is, if I let myself gain any weight, I'll be huge. There's no middle ground. It's an absolute, and it justifies the behavior.
That kind of few-based thinking must make the therapeutic approach incredibly delicate.
Oh, absolutely.
The sources really warn against an authoritarian style of care. Why is that so important?
Well, because control is the entire issue. If you come in with an authoritarian approach, you're just seen as another threat to the one thing they feel they have power over.
You just create resistance.
Instantly.
Yeah.
Trust is everything. It has to be built on acceptance, a non-judgmental, person-centered approach. It's the only way in.
So, thinking about the long game, treatment helps with stabilization, but recovery isn't straightforward. The sources say about a third of patients recover fully,
Right.
but another third seem to maintain a chronic illness.
And that's the real provocative thought here. It leaves us with a question for you, the listener, to really think about. If a huge portion of these are chronic conditions, and you have something like social media that can either help or, severely interfere with recovery, how do our long-term support models need to change? How do we provide care that lasts, that's sustainable, way beyond just that initial crisis phase? That's something really worth mulling over.
Okay, let's unpack this. Welcome to the deep dive.
Glad to be here.
Today, we're taking a quick but really thorough look at the idea of crisis.
Right.
Not just the event itself, but the whole intervention theory built around it. Our mission here is to get a handle on the framework professionals use when life just feels completely overwhelming.
Yeah, and the formal definition is a good place to start. The sources see a crisis as an acute, time-limited event.
Time limited, that's important.
Very. It's an overwhelming emotional reaction to some kind of stressful event that could be situational, developmental, or even just the perception of an event.
And that, I think, is the core insight from the reading. This moment, it has this dual nature.
Hmm.
On one hand, it's a real danger to a person's stability, their personality organization. But on the other, it's a huge opportunity for growth.
Exactly. And the outcome really hinges on the support they have and, like you said, how they see the crisis themselves.
So how do we start to categorize these things?
Well, the sources give us three basic types. First, there are maturational crises.
Okay.
These are predictable. They're tied to life stages.
Sure.
Think about a teenager leaving home for college. It's a normal developmental step, but it's also a huge internal stressor.
Then you get the second type, the external shocks, situational crises.
Yeah, those are the ones that blindside you.
Totally. A sudden job loss, a divorce, a really severe illness you just didn't see coming. They feel so unfair.
And then the third type is adventitious crises or, disasters.
Large-scale events.
Unplanned, catastrophic, a natural disaster, an act of violence in a community, or that example from the reading, an entire family losing everything in an apartment fire. Just devastating.
And it's worth remembering that the whole idea of formal crisis intervention,
Yeah.
it's pretty modern, isn't it?
It is. A lot of the groundwork was laid by figures like Eric Lindemann after that Coconut Grove nightclub fire in the 40s.
Right. Studying grief. And then Gerald Kaplan in the 60s really helped to formalize the strategies.
And that history gave us these really practical models. I mean, intervention is simply what health professionals do to help people cope.
But the goal is specific.
Very specific. The core goal is always to return the person to their pre-crisis level of functioning. Or, and this is a big or, even higher.
So the crisis can actually be a catalyst for building better coping skills.
Precisely.
Which brings us to a really practical structure, Roberts' 7-stage model. Let's just focus on the first 3 since they're so critical. Step 1.
Rapidly establish rapport, build that relationship, and fast.
Okay. And step 2 is assessment.
Yes, and this is where safety is absolutely number one. You have to include what are called lethality measures.
Meaning you have to ask directly about suicidal or homicidal thoughts.
You have to. There's no time for subtlety. Safety first.
Absolutely. And then step 3 is figuring out the major problem. What was the precipitating event, the real last straw?
And because a good intervention has to be based on the person's perception, you ask questions like, what leads you to seek help right now?
You're centering their reality.
You have to. The timeline and the solution have to respect their point of view.
Fundamentally, though, a crisis is self-limiting. Our sources say it usually resolves in, 4 to 6 weeks?
That's right. Which makes that timely intervention so essential.
And that intervention happens on different levels.
3 levels, yeah. You have primary care, which is all about prevention.
Before it even happens.
Right. Then secondary care is the acute intervention itself, stepping in right when it's happening to stabilize things.
And tertiary.
That's the long-term support, rehabilitation. Things like critical incident stress debriefing for groups after a shared tragedy.
So the resolution really depends heavily on other people stepping in and helping.
It does. We're assuming the person is mentally healthy, just in a temporary state of disequilibrium. Their usual coping skills have failed them.
And that failure means they are often uniquely open to outside help. So the professional has to be active, even directive.
Yeah, you can't be passive.
So the final thought for you to consider is this. If a person in crisis is so much more open to outside help, what does that imply about the absolute necessity of early direct intervention? It seems to make timing, everything.